طلعت تزاور عن كهفهم ذات اليمين وإذا غربت تقرضهم ذات الشمال وهم في فجوة منه ذلك من آيات الله من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
Just gentle reminder to the ladies that there was once again talking during Quran recitation. So a gentle reminder to all those talking to respect the Quran. Thank you so much.
बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत खुशी से रंज उठाए कोई तो हम जाने खुशी से रंज उठाए कोई तो हम जाने खुद अपने घर को लुटाए कोई तो हम जाने बशर जहाँ में नबी भी बना खुदा भी बना बशर जहाँ में नबी भी बना खुदा भी बना हुसैन बन के दिखाए कोई तो हम जाने एक सलावत का सहारा दें प्लीज हुसैन जब के चले बादे दोपहर रन को हुसैन जब के चले बादे दोपहर रन को न था कोई के जो थामे रकाबे तो सन को न था कोई के जो थामे रकाबे तो सन को सकीना झार रही थी सकीना झार रही थी अबा के दामन को हुसैन चुप के खड़े थे झुकाए गर्दन को हुसैन छुप के खड़े थे झुकाए गर्दन को नासरा था कोई शाहे करबलाई को नासरा था कोई शाहे करबलाई को फ़कत सवार किया था बहन ने भाई को फ़कत सवार किया था बहन ने भाई को। हुसैन जब के चले बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। करबला देखी तो हम समझे कि हाँ और भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। बर्छियाँ मार के अकबर को पुकारे आदा, शेह से पूछो कोई फर्जंद जवान और भी है। फलके पीर तुझे शेह की ज़ईफ़ी की कसम, अली अकबर सा ज़माने में जवान और भी है। माँ ने कासिम से कहा सुबह को तुम होगे शहीद, इसलिए ब्याह की जल्दी मेरी जान और भी है। अपने फर्जंदों के मरने पे भी गिरिया न किया, दहर में ज़ैनब मज़लूम सीमा और भी है। शेह से ज़ैनब ने कहा तुम जो हो मुश्ताक़ क़ज़ा, मेरी अम्मा का कोई फ़ातिहा ख़ान और भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत।
मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत। मोहम्मद अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। अपने लहू में आज संवरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। रुकता नहीं है सीने से जो खून है रवां, ऐ लाल ये बता दो के किस जा लगी सिना। अपनी रियाज़तों का खजीना तो देख लो, अपनी रियाज़तों का खजीना तो देख लो। अकबर हटा लो हाथ में सीना तो देख लूं, अपने लहू में आज संवरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। तुम क्या गिरे हो मक्तल में उठ ना सका हुसैन, तुमको सिना लगी है और जख्मी हुआ हुसैन। आंखें जो तुम चुराते हो दिल छोड़ते हैं हम, आंखें जो तुम चुराते हो दिल छोड़ते हैं हम। तुम हिचकियाँ जो लेते हो दम तोड़ते हैं हम। अपने लहू में आज संवरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। औलाद पे जब आता है 18वां बरस, खुशियाँ समेट लाता है 18वां बरस। दूल्हा से आप लग थे हर एक लिबास में, दूल्हा से आप लग थे हर एक लिबास में। दिल माँ का शाद रहता था सहरे की आस में, अपने लहू में आज संवरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। कासिद खड़ा है पहलू में ऐ लाल देख लो, सोहरा दुआएं देती है आमीन तो कहो। रखता हूँ खत को लाश पे दिल बर जवाब दो, रखता हूँ खत को लाश पे दिल बर जवाब दो। सुहरा सलाम कहती है अकबर जवाब दो, अपने लहू में आज संवरने के दिन न थे, अकबर जवां भी तेरे मरने के दिन न थे। सलमान बहुत कहती थी माँ खूब भरी मई याद से लपट कर, हाय हाय अली अकबर, हाय हाय अली अकबर। अरमान तपहनाऊंगी पो शाक शहानी, अफसोस के रासाई न तुझ को ये जवानी, कैसा था मुक़द्दर, हाय हाय अली अकबर। अरे इतना तो जरा ठहरो तुम्हें दूल्हा बना लूं, अरे इतना तो जरा ठहरो तुम्हें दूल्हा बना लूं। बस एक झलक शहर की सुगरा को देखा लूं, बेचैन थी ख्वाहिश, हाय हाय अली अकबर। अरे 18 बरस पाल के परवान चढ़ाया, 18 बरस पाल के परवान चढ़ाया। वो गे सुवाला है मेरा खून में नहाया, साथ के हो ये मादर। हाँ पहले तो एक आवाज पे उठ जाते थे बेटा, हाँ पहले तो एक आवाज पे उठ जाते थे बेटा, अब इतनी सदाओं पे भी पहलू नहीं बदला, क्या हो गया दिलबर, हाय हाय अली अकबर। अरे तुम हिचकियां लेके जो दम तोड़ रहे हो, मुँह से हमेशा के लिए मोड़ रहे हो, क्यों रूठे हो दिलबर, हाय हाय में लूटने में सितमगर अरे मादे की सदाए अली अकबर अली अकबर छिन जाएगी चादर हाय हाय अली अकबर अरे जब कोई जवान लाश नजर आती है महशर अरे जब कोई जवान लाश नजर आती है महशर एक याद सोए कर बोबला जाती है महशर दिल रोता है कह कर हाय हाय अली अकबर नारे सलवात
Salawat. أدم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمسابقينا بأبا Abdillah al-Hussein. As we wait for Sheikh to come, just a few announcements. The first one is the worldwide drive for blood donation. Who is Hussein has started an initiative that on the 27th of August they want to do a record-breaking collection of over 500 units of blood. So please, there will be a desk outside. So anyone who wants to partake in that are requested to sign up with the desk outside. The second announcement is that College are wanting to put clips of different centers, what Imam Hussein means to them, or what Muharram means to them. It's a 60 seconds clip, and they'll showcase that on their social media. So please, especially the youth and the kids, if they can sort of send across a 60 minutes clip, or if they want, we can record it here, so we can then post that to College. The next one is on tomorrow, Saturday. There's a special workshop, Identity and Sexuality in Modern Society, an Islamic analysis. It's going to take place here tomorrow after Salah al-Dhuhrain. It's for over 18s, and parents are strongly encouraged to attend that particular seminar. There's also the fundraising drive. Unfortunately, the programs that we host require funding. So please, we've got the last few nights here, so there's a desk outside. There's a collection bucket there, and people who don't have any spare change, we also have a card machine, so we accept cards. There's also bank details on your screens, so please, over the next few nights, if we can donate as much as we can, it'll be very much appreciated. Timing for oncoming programs have been amended in line with the namaz time, so the programs will start at 7:30 inshallah. So please, if you can get here for that time, that'll be appreciated, and especially the reciters, if they want to recite, then please try and make it for 7:30. I think those are about the I think that's about all in announcements. Can we all welcome Sheikh with a big Nare Salawat for him to continue with his lecture. Salawat.
Can we just encourage all the men and women, women are fine. Men just come forward because we do have latecomers. So let's just come forward and we welcome really come forward and we welcome the Shaykh with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. For the love of Aba Abdillah al-Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. And for the awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولله ملك السماوات والأرض ويوم تقوم الساعة يومئذ يخسر المبطلون وترى كل أمة جاثية كل أمة تدعى إلى كتابها اليوم تجزون ما كنتم تعملون هذا كتابنا ينطق عليكم بالحق إنا كنا نستنسخ ما كنتم تعملون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Azzamallahu ajurana wa ajurakum bi musabina Abi Abdillah al-Hussein, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. One of the great challenges that we have is that as much great parenting and communal effort that goes into raising our next generation, there are many an external, outside force that seeks to undermine and undo the great work that is done by the community. Tonight's discussion, inshaAllah, will look at the issues of those outside forces, particularly those of the social media world and the forthcoming evolution of social media, which is known as the metaverse. It may be that you've heard of this term, particularly that Facebook has changed ownership and is now under Meta. Metaverse is to be a new form of complete submersion into a virtual reality world, such that every one of your senses are taken over and you can curate the world that you live in. Imagine how far and quick we have come in recent technological advancements. Imagine how far and quick we have come when it comes to social media revolution, and how much our lives are now dependent on mobile phones, dependent on social media for our means of communication, our means of knowledge. What happens when we are now able to detract ourselves, remove ourselves from reality, and go into a world that is curated by every desire that we have, for as long as we have it? What happens when our youth grow up in that world? We are on the cusp of that now, and we are only a few years away from it. What you and I need to discuss tonight, inshaAllah, is that how the Quran and Ahadith speaks about this topic of social media, of allowing certain devices into our realm, and particularly how the metaverse appears to be evolving, and how we can prepare ourselves and our children for this huge shift that is about to occur in human evolution. The reality is that the way in which our brains have been made, we have been evolving as a human species over hundreds of thousands and even millions of years. But those points of evolution have normally been quite consistent with the environment around us. If you imagine previous technological advancements, the leap in advancement was never that great, that quick, that the entirety of our environment changed so quickly. And so generally, our brains and even our bodies evolved in accordance with the level of external evolution around us. The great challenge that we have at the moment is that our brains simply cannot keep up with the level of evolution, with the level of technology that is being placed upon it. And what happens? When you have companies that are paying experts, child psychologists, to understand how children become addicted to things, in order for them to be able to sell you those products, knowing how children are addicted to those matters, we are completely vulnerable to the progresses of these technologies, and our defense mechanisms have not even started to understand where these technologies are planning on going. Therefore, all of the work that we put into our children can very easily be undone if we do not understand the enemy that is at our gates, and actually the enemy that we have let into our own houses and given into the palms of our children's hands. Last night, we talked about how the Holy Quran and the prophetic model is for us to be able to dedicate our children either prior to conception or in utero, whilst in the womb. And we looked at the examples of Prophet Zakaria and Prophet Yahya, salamullahi alayhima, waliya, the Quran said. Gift to me an heir from you, O Allah, not from me. If the heir is from me, it will be riddled with weaknesses and errors. But if that child is a gift from you, min ladunka, you can imagine the extent, the capacity of this child. And then we concluded with a particular verse about Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail, salamullahi alayhima, from Surah As-Safat. It's the famous verse where Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam says, I saw in my dream that I am slaughtering you. Fandur madha tara. What is your opinion of the matter, O my son? Insha'Allah, you will find me amongst the patient ones. We highlighted in this verse that the beginning of the verse says, فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَعَهُ سَعْيًا, that wherever Ibrahim alayhi salam went, Ismail went. Whatever Ibrahim did, Ismail participated in. If he was giving a sermon, he was present. If his father was giving sadaqah, Ismail saw it. Everything. And so the thinking of Ibrahim, the submission of Ibrahim, was something that Ismail alayhi salam saw at all times. It was not surprising that a young boy like Ismail alayhi salam could then submit at that one moment that turned the course of history. We highlighted here, it's not simply you dedicating your child to God. You can't say, I dedicate what is in my womb to my Lord, and then not put the effort in to bring that child up properly. And so understanding this, tonight we continue this discussion about raising the next generation from understanding the outside influences and how we need to protect ourselves, particularly from this thing here, the interference of growing up in a social media world, and particularly where we're going next in the evolution of social media, and that is the metaverse. So I ask you, inshallah, to remember the martyr of tonight, the great champion of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Qasim ibn al-Hasan, with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now you know better than me that Ahlulbayt alayhim salam have spoken at length regarding the malleability of the heart of a young person. How easily that heart can be molded and remolded, how that heart can be shaped for the sake of goodness, but also that whatever it is presented with, it absorbs like a sponge. And so if it is presented with goodness, it will habituate itself to goodness. If it is presented with shak or su', it will also habituate itself to those very same things. Hadith from our second Imam, Hasan al-Mujtaba, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. He addresses the youth. So I say this hadith and I say it to the youth. So if you are someone under the age of 40, you are designated as youth still, huh? And some of you that are just above 40, I'm going to consider you youth as well. Okay, so don't feel like this is an ageist discussion. But listen to how Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam addresses even us who are beginning to go a bit grey, our back is beginning to bend, the hair is beginning to come a little bit loose. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam is still addressing you and I. Surely, today, you are the youth of the ummah. Take pride in that statement. You are the youth of the ummah. And tomorrow you will be the leaders of the community, Imam says. Thus, it is incumbent upon you to seek knowledge. So then, if you're not able to memorize all that you learn, you must write it down and preserve it for safekeeping so that you can make use of it when you need it later. MashaAllah, brothers here writing down the ahadith, writing down what they are hearing, an incredible manifestation of the hadith of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. Famous hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Surely the heart of the youth is like an uncultivated ground. It will accept whatever you throw upon it. If you throw good to that heart, if you sow the seeds of good in that heart, it will accept it. And sadly, if you throw the seeds of evil, it will also accept it. Now you won't be surprised to hear Ahlulbayt alayhim wassalam have predicted the technological advancements in their narrations and have been commenting on ayat of Quran to expand upon those verses about the technological advancements. Our sixth Imam alayhi salam, fifth Imam alayhi salam, they have narrations which say that at the end of time, a person will look into the palm of their hand and they'll be able to speak to another person from the other side of the planet. That is prophetic. Only prophetic knowledge could tell you that. It's impossible for an ordinary human being to think of that and to say it, for it to be recorded, and at that time, no one to be able to understand it and still accept it as a hadith and write it down such that it was presented to us even until today. Open the Qur'ans, please, to chapter number 31 of the Holy Qur'an, verses 6 to 7. Everyone has their phones, and also the ayat will come on the screen, inshaAllah. Chapter number 31, Surah Luqman, verse number 6 to 7. Now you know better than me, Surah Luqman is particular about the great sage Luqman alayhi salam. What is Luqman famous for? Luqman giving advice to his son. So the context here of these ayat need to be read in this great sage and in the context of what Luqman alayhi salam is famous for. Even if the ayah is not particularly saying he is giving his son advice, the theme of the surah is giving advice to your youth, bringing up your children and the next generation of the community. Verses 6 to 7. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا. And amongst mankind is he who takes, instead of good guidance, frivolous discourses, who takes silly stories, silly fables, nonsense, lahwa al-hadith. Why? لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. To lead astray from Allah's path without any knowledge. وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا. And they take it as a mockery. It's just a waste of time. There's no benefit to it. It's just a pastime. It's just a mockery for people to participate. What do they take? Lahwa al-hadith. Just frivolous and low discourse. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. These, they shall have an abasing chastisement. وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا. When such a person has ayat recited upon them, what do? وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا كَأَن لَّمْ يَسْمَعْهَا كَأَنَّ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ وَقَرًا. When ayat of Allah are communicated, recited to him, he turns back proudly as if he has not heard the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as if in his ears there was a block. Now just look at these two verses. It's very important you understand the siyaq here, the context of these two verses. In the first ayah, what is this person willing to listen to? Lahwal hadith. Ahsand. So their ears are open for what is frivolous. But in the second ayah, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ. But if actually ayat are recited to them, it's as if in his ears there is a heaviness, a block. How interesting, isn't it? It's telling you in these two verses that there are some people, because they acquaint themselves to lahu, and it's so normalized for them to take frivolous, low, wasteful discourse, when ayat and haqq is recited to them, they can't make sense of it. Actually, what happens to them? Walla mustakbiran. Na'udhu billah. They actually turn away arrogantly at these verses. It's really interesting. Sometimes you find a person, it may be a friend, it may be a family member, it may be a person who's in your school or in your business, and you might just You see them, and that even if something happens to them in life, or even if the most beautiful of ayah is presented to them, even if they go on hajj or ziyarah, it doesn't change them whatsoever. And you always sit there thinking, what happens? What has to happen to a human being that so every year in his life, in her life, nothing changes? What has to be happening in here that blocks it? Allah Jalla Jalaluhu tells us that the symptom and the cause is very important. The symptom that you see is that nothing penetrates past here. But the cause, the underlying factor, is because they so acquaint themselves with lahw al-hadith that they do not find anything interesting, anything inspiration from ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's clearly a link here between these two things. And you and I want to be able to understand the relationship of these. Now, ahadith from Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam expand upon this. And what they did was that they actually predicted the rise of particular technological advancements and the outcomes of those technological advancements. Not how individuals might partake in them, the generalities of what is going to happen with that. Would it surprise you if I told you that this thing here, the TV, has been predicted? Would it surprise you if I told you that satellite dishes have been mentioned specifically in our ahadith? It wouldn't surprise you, I'm sure, because this is prophetic knowledge. This isn't knowledge of a soothsayer. This isn't knowledge of, someone who predicts something and 20% of the time gets it right. We're not here, picking the lottery numbers. This is prophetic knowledge. And it's been captured for us to be able to appreciate. In a hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he says the following: Yabna Mas'ud, O Ibn Mas'ud, Inna min a'lam as-sa'ati wa ashratiha. From amongst the signs of the end of time, an tawasir al-atbaq wa an taqta' al-arham. That the satellite dishes will be spraying their, I don't know, what do they send? Someone better here, more knowledgeable than me. Their waves and signals. أن تواصل الأطباق وأن تقطع الأرحام. And at the end of time, people will separate from their families. People will stop talking to their families. People will not want to hang out with their families. Have you ever heard anything more prophetic than this? Could you imagine a man in the desert 1400 years ago telling us the same word that today we still use for satellite dishes? My Arab speaking friends will know that this same language is used, the same words are still used until today. The Prophet predicted that we were going to have satellite dishes, and then in the next part of the hadith, even though this hadith has 20 different signs coming at the end of time, he immediately put together these two signs: satellite dishes with their waves, and families separating from each other, families breaking apart from one another. You know better than I. People nowadays, when it comes to having a family meal, they can't have a family meal without having the TV on or watching the TV. They can't even face one another and talk to one another. They have to stare at this gizmo. How many family members will sit, their phones are still on them whilst they're eating, having to check the phone every 2 minutes, WhatsApp's going, I need to do, can't even take a break from it. Happens or it doesn't happen? It happens. You've seen it. You know it happens. And the Prophet predicted these two things as next to one another in this particular hadith. Another hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. I won't read the Arabic to it, it's a lengthy hadith, so I'm just going to read you the English of this part. Tribulation, trial, will be presented to the hearts of people like a reed mat woven stick by stick, which gives them their news. The Prophet said that there was going to be a mat that's kind of woven in such a way, and it's going to give us all of our information. Incredible, isn't it? Now, if you're a prophet speaking 1400 years ago to Bedouins, to Arabs, how are you going to explain this wonderful device? It's on the wall, it's like a mat, and it's woven together. We have all of our pixels woven. Of course, the Prophet couldn't use the words Super HD and 9.1 digital Dolby surround sound. He couldn't use that language, could he? Tribulation will be presented to the hearts of people like a reed mat woven stick by stick, and any heart afflicted by it will have a black mark put into its heart. But any heart that can reject the affliction that comes from it will have a white mark put into it. Thus there will be two kinds of hearts, the hadith continues. Thus there will be two kinds of hearts. One is pure like a white gemstone, and it will not be harmed by this tribulation as long as the heavens and the earth endure. And the other heart is black and dusty like a worn out vessel. Neither can that heart recognize good, nor can it reject evil, but rather it will be immersed in desires. I'm going to let you take that hadith in, and I'd like you all to be able to move as far forward as possible, so we don't have to keep interrupting the majlis, inshallah. For the love of our Holy Prophet Muhammad, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Barakallah feekum. Thus there will be two kinds of hearts. One is pure like a white gemstone, and it will not be harmed by any tribulation as long as the heavens and the earth endure. And the other is black and dusty like a worn out vessel, neither recognizing good nor rejecting evil, but rather it will be immersed in desires. Now here we're not saying don't have a TV or don't watch TV. Allah knows, I also watch TV, I enjoy TV. It's not what's being said. Technology in and of itself is not a bad thing. Advancement is not a bad thing. It is how we use that technological advancement. It is how it is used to us as to whether we want to accept or reject those particular technological advancements. Our ulama are unanimous in saying that these ahadith about the satellite dishes and about the TV, they're unanimous in saying that this is hadith, the interpretation of these hadith are about these things. But then they have to explain and say, well, is the TV the problem in and of itself? Of course not. We have stations, Marajit have stations in their names, TV stations. Marajit go on TV. So how can it be that TV is a bad thing? It's not. We're not saying that TV in and of itself is a bad thing. What we're saying is that without control on these devices, the outcome is simple. That we have let into our houses the voice of the enemy without having any control of it. Which person is silly enough to be able to allow the enemy to take over your house? What we have done is by allowing free access and by allowing every single type of channel and every single type of ideology to enter. Some of our satellite dishes has 900 channels. Be honest, of those 900 channels, how many of them are actually useful? How many of them are just a waste? You know better than me. What we have done is, for the first time in the history of Islam, we have lost control over what our children consume, and we have let the enemy into our houses and raise our children. Now, if you open the Qur'ans again, chapter number 15 of the Holy Qur'an, Surah Al-Hijr, verse number 29 and 30, you will see Iblis from the outset promises us that he will use things to be able to beguile us and make things attractive to beguile us. Listen to my words and understand, pay attention to my words. From the outset, Iblis has promised Allah he will use techniques that make things attractive to you as the means of beguiling you. Qala Rabbi, Iblis said, my Lord, bima aghwaytani, because now you have put me astray. Of course, you cannot blame Allah for Iblis' mistake, but Iblis is so arrogant, he cannot look at his own self. He just blames Allah. Bima aghwaytani لَأُزَيِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, I will make it a zina for them. I'll make it beautiful for them. I'll make it attractive to them throughout the world. وَلَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, and I will misguide them altogether. Can you see? He says the sort of thing I'm going to do is something that's going to affect everyone. وَلَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, all of them are going to be affected by my means of attracting them. إِلَّا, except whom? عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ, except your sincere servants. Here, chosen is the wrong translation. Mukhlasin, those people who are sincere. So the vast majority people, 99.999% of people are going to be misled by a certain attraction. Illa, except there are going to be certain people who can be sincere through this, navigate through this particular issue. Now, having understood this as the background, I'm merging the topic of TV and social media into one for the time being, for you to understand, because it's principally the same thing, that we are opening ourselves to the world and everything that is good as well as everything that is bad in that world. And if we don't have tight controls over those things, then we allow the evil of the world to settle into our hearts, and it will seem attractive to us. Now, I mentioned earlier on something very important, that these corporations, they don't do things just off the cuff. They're not doing things because they're testing, for the first time what works and what doesn't. They spend billions in R&D, in research and development, and they do this by hiring experts who explain human psyche, vulnerabilities of human psyche, and particularly how to make you addicted to things, and particularly addicted to their products. It's a business. They want you going to their product more than anyone else's. And the more you go to their product, the more time you spend on it, the more clicks you give on it, the more advertising they spend, the more you go back to it, the more money they make. It doesn't take a genius to understand their business plan. And we are all submerged into that business plan. But what many don't realize is the extent of the dark arts that they use to be able to make you and I addicted. Kindly open your phones and go to Google and just search this particular book. And all of you, please, especially parents, buy this book and read it. And I mean that sincerely. I've told you every night, I either bring you a book or I show you a book, I tell you a book. This time I'm telling you, read this book. If you can get it on PDF, read it. If you can buy it, buy it. The book is called The Corporation by Joel Bakan. B-A-K-A-N. The Corporation by Joel Bakan. It is the unyielding pursuit, the sycophantic pursuit of the corporation to make money off you at all costs. It doesn't matter whether they destroy you or the planet. It doesn't matter if you die, as long as they can make money from you. And you know this, corporations will do that. Anyone who smokes a cigarette knows that the corporation is actually literally killing you. But don't worry, so long as they can advertise to the next generation, it doesn't matter whom they kill off, because they have the next generation coming up. The corporation does not care about you. It wants you to do one thing and one thing only, and that is be addicted to their product. This book is one of the greatest books to analyze the practices and behaviors of the modern corporation in manipulating you and how they do it. I had the honor of visiting Professor Noam Chomsky in his office a few years back when I went to the States. Those of you who know Professor Noam Chomsky, he's generally considered to be the smartest man in the world, or the best academic in the world. So I had the honor of going to visit him in his office, and before he came in and I was sitting there waiting for him to come in, I decided to scan through his books. Now when I tell you his office is a mess, it is just piles of books, as you can imagine. And one of those books that was in his office happened to be this book, The Corporation by Joel Bakan, and I was so pleased that I happened to have read a book that Professor Noam Chomsky had also read. So I'm not necessarily only suggesting it to you, by proxy even Professor Chomsky is suggesting it to you. Now, in this book, what it goes through is the ways in which corporations and the evidences of which corporations will pay child psychologists to be able to understand how children work in order to make sure that when a corporation advertises, it gets your child addicted to that thing. Now sometimes it's food. It's as simple as how much salt they put in that particular thing to make you constantly crave it and come back to it. The salt level and the sugar levels are enough to make you and I addicted to something. Sometimes it's as simple as this. What am I doing here? What am I doing? Scrolling. Yeah? This has actually become an addictive thing. Do you know that? The same part of the brain that lights up when you give a heroin addict heroin is the same part of the brain that lights up when you do this, when you're scrolling. Did you know that? It's no different. The same way a heroin addict sees heroin is the same thing that's happening in mine and your brain just when you do this. You think it was by chance that someone invented this? You think someone just stumbled across it? No. They spent millions researching it to understand what behavior they could put into you that makes you addicted to this practice. Don't be naive to this. What else do? They create free games knowing that it's a pathway towards more addictive and destructive games. You know what they do? Some of these child psychologists? They go as far as what is known as pupil dilatory studies. They test these gadgets, these things out on children, and then they actually see how the pupil dilates, how the child responds to be able to know what gets you and I addicted to things. If you want to watch a documentary that actually exposed this, again, write this down in your Google search, write this down in your phone. You can go to PBS, documentary by the name of Merchants of Cool. Watch this documentary, Merchants of Cool, and it will explain to you in detail how they make you addicted to everything that they make out there. We actually did this in Baab-Ul-Ilm last year. We watched the documentary. What was the documentary called? The social dilemma. We had a film night where we watched a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma, which goes through all the major social media platforms, and their creators tell you how they made you addicted to it, and how they monetize off the back of you, and how they destroy lives and democracy and don't care about it. It's a whole documentary. If you haven't watched it, please. It's called The Social Dilemma. Now, turn again in the Qur'an to chapter number 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 11 and 12. Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 11 and 12. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What will they say? وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. When it's said to these corporations, when it's said to these people that manipulate you, don't make mischief on the earth. قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. We're doing nothing but good. There's freedom. People can go onto whatever platform they want. They can spend as long as they want scrolling. It's no problem. We're doing good. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. These people themselves are the mischief makers, but they don't perceive it. They don't realize. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Now, just to give you a few interesting stats for you and I to be able to think about. Over the course of our lifetimes, we will spend 22 years on the internet. The average person is going to live maybe 70 to 80 years. Let's just say 80, and let's just say 20 years is spent on the internet. That's the average now. 1/4 of your life is going to be spent on the internet. Can you imagine? How much of our life is wasted? How much we could achieve if we just learned not to, and then we don't even know what we're consuming yet. In the United States of America, I didn't find this statistic here, but we're not too different from the United States, unfortunately. By the age of 18 years old, the average 18-year-old will have seen 200,000 acts of violence on their TVs and phones and iPads, and they will have seen 16,000 murders by the age of 18. How many murders are there in films, in TV? How many murders are there in all the shows that we watch? You think that this is not having an impact? You think this has no impact on your psyche or on your children's psyche as to what they consume? The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says in that hadith where he talks about the signs of the end of time, Ya ibn Mas'ud, inna min a'lam as-sa'ati wa ashratiha an yakuna waladu ghaydan. One of the signs of the end of time is that children will be angry. Children won't know how to control their emotions. If you feed into them violence constantly, what do you think these children are going to turn out like? Now, I hope my mum and dad don't hear this. My dad is definitely going to watch this. I have to admit it so that parents know. My own parents didn't know when I would go and play violent games. They didn't know. I'm telling this for the parents. It's so easy to deceive. Sadly, I grew up playing GTA. Now, thankfully, I stopped. I only ended up playing GTA 1, the original one. It never went further. But still, the violence. You know what you're doing in Grand Theft Auto? I mean, I don't even want to go to the new ones. But the old one, you're simply hijacking cars, you're killing people. Did you remember it? Yeah? Look, my brother here remembers it. Good, don't play it, Mahdi. Don't play it, bro. It's no, you won't, Hadi. I will give you a clip if you do. I used to like win a Quran competition in the mosque. They would give you £100 on Eid day. I would go and buy my mom, I feel sorry for her having to admit this live in front of everybody. She doesn't know what she's buying for me. She doesn't know what game she's buying for me. It's 18. So, yeah, I know. Khala Zainab tells her, I need the clip around the ear. It's not young Hadi that needs one. I can't buy it from the shop because I'm not 18. Used to go and give her the money. Poor thing. We grew up like this. I don't want my young brothers and sisters to grow up like this. But this is what's happening to us. Now here, what I want to be able to ask you is just one thing. If we consume the same as what everybody else out there is consuming, what is the difference in here? What is the difference between us and them? And I don't mean as if we're better. I don't mean us and them as in otherizing. I just mean with your values. If you're watching, what's that nonsense dating show that everyone loves? Love Island. Yeah? Nonsense. But genuinely, do you know how many times Shia on my timeline on Twitter, Shia, watching it, retweeting it, talking about it. It's the most disgusting thing. It's just nonsense. It's tripe. I can't even use the words I'd want to. But tell me something. If you're a Shia, but you come here, you put on the black, you do the martyrdom, you cry for, Shah Qasim, but then you go home and you watch the same thing that everybody else out there is watching. I'm asking an honest question. What is the difference between you and them? Zahiran, you're different because you wear black. Zahiran, you're different because you cry. Batinan, what is the difference between you and them? But there is an outcome to this that's predicted in our ahadith. And do you know what the outcome is? Specifically, the outcome is the rejection of the awaited savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. Listen to this ayah and this hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Very important. The ayah, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرَةٌ. Man and woman, are upon themselves a watcher, an insight. Basiratun. We keep an eye on ourselves. We know the truth of ourselves, Allah says in this ayah. Now in the tafsir of this, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Ahlul Basair are going to be the ones who reject Imam al-Mahdi. Ahlul Basair is whom? It's not just the ulama. Yes, according to some hadith, the first people that are going to reject al-Mahdi are the ulama. They will say, Yabna Zahra, go back, we don't need you. In this hadith, Ahlul Basair are not the ulama. It is the mu'mineen. The ordinary mu'min, me and you. Why? The ayah is talking about Balil Insan. It's all people, it's general. There's an itlaq here to it, or a generality to it. Balil insanu ala nafsihi basira. Mankind is a true observer upon themselves. Imam al-Sadiq says, Ahlul Basair will reject Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Why? What's happening in here? Listen to this hadith. Our sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, says the following. Alaykum bit-taslimi wal-raddi ilayna وَإِنْتِذَارِ أَمْرِنَا وَأَمْرِكُمْ. It's upon you to do taslim and to refer your affairs back to us and to await our command and your command, the thing that is for you as well. وَفَرَجِنَا وَفَرَجِكُمْ, and await our faraj and your faraj. فَلَوْ قَدْ قَامَ قَائِمُنَا وَتَكَلَّمَ مُتَكَلِّمُنَا. When our qa'im rises and our speaker, our representative speaks, meaning whom? Al-Mahdi alayhi salam. فَلَوْ قَدْ قَامَ قَائِمُنَا وَتَكَلَّمَ مُتَكَلِّمُنَا ثُمَّ استأنف بكم تعليم القرآن وشرائع الدين والأحكام والفرائض كما أنزل الله على محمد. Al-Mahdi will teach to you the Quran and the Sharia and the Ahkam and the Fara'id just as Rasulullah taught. لأنكر أهل البصائر فيكم ذلك اليوم إنكارا شديدا. On that day, Ahlul Basair, the Shia, the good folk from the Shia, will reject Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, the most comprehensive, forceful rejection. May Allah protect us. I ask you, why would Ahlul Basair, the people of insight, the people who come to the majalis, the people who weep for Hussein salamullahi alayhi, the people who go on ziyarah, the one that Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam called you Ahlul Basair, why would you and I reject our awaited Savior? It's what's happening in here. If you and I consume exactly the same as what everybody else is consuming in, fundamentally there is no difference between us and them. If you're going to watch TikTok and see all the stupid dances, if you're going to open up Instagram and see all the dancing girls, and if you're going to see all the nonsense on there, then you're no different to anyone else outside, because that's the rest of the world. That's what they're doing. Shall I tell you how played you are? You understand my word played, huh? When I say this. Deceived. Shall I tell you? Do you know which country made TikTok? China. Do you know that China controls the algorithm of what you see? Do you know this? If you're in America and you open up TikTok, if you're in Britain and you open up TikTok, there is a specific algorithm to reach you that is not in China. Did you know this? How many of you actually know this? Genuinely. It's a very few of you. It's less than 10% of you. Should I tell you what the difference is in the algorithm? If you're in China and you open up TikTok, what the Chinese government wants you to receive as youth, as people using TikTok, are people who are doing good things, achievements, youth making social enterprise, youth becoming successful in math competitions, youth becoming masters of karate, youth doing something with their life, and you are rewarded. That algorithm is that the Chinese government makes you see positive things for social development. Did you know here and in the United States, China, send you a different algorithm? Do you know what they send you? All the nonsense that you see. They want you to see girls dancing, boys and girls dancing with each other, pranks upon your parents, pranks upon people. How many pranks do you see? Yeah, I'm not saying it's not funny. Some of them are downright hilarious. But if you want to destroy a nation, destroy a generation, you make them in their mind be rewarded with the dopamine for thinking stupid things are good, thinking that this is what you're supposed to grow up doing. A large proportion of people grow up thinking that this is what life is about. But in China, they don't let their children think that. Next time you open up TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and you see this, understand that you are being played. Understand it. If you go to Dubai, all you will see when you open up your thing, you're flicking through, all you'll see is these cars, the deserts, these rich Arabs spending all their money, going out to nice restaurants. Why? That's what they want you to do. Waste your life just eating food, filling your belly, spending money on them. Are you that daft that you can't see it? Are you that silly that you can't see that when you go to Dubai, why all of a sudden you get these particular algorithms coming to you? Ahlul Basair, yesterday the people who actually have insight, when Mahdi comes they will reject him. Think about it. Think about it very carefully. About what we do and where we go with these things. Now the last thing I want to tell you is about metaverse. Metaverse is this. It is going to be a comprehensive sense indulgement. Every one of your senses is going to be taken over by some sort of device, and you'll be immersed into a new world. You'll be immersed through goggles, through things on the tips of your fingers, through things in your ears, things on your feet, and other places. And you will curate for yourself your own fantasy world of whatever you want for however long you want. If you give a person that, what do you think they're going to do with it? And the same way that social media has been monetized and that created to make you addicted to it, they will also find ways of doing this for you. And they've already started to explain it. If you want to go see on the Muslim Vibe, TMV, I'm sure you've all heard of the Muslim Vibe. There is a podcast that was done a couple of months ago, I think with Hasib Rizvi, and someone who explains where metaverse in its first iteration is going. And he explains, he says, for example, you'll have this VR device that you can put onto your entire body. And he gives an example. He says this example. You can, with purchasing, you have Bitcoin or you have your cryptocurrency, whatever, you will purchase a yacht for yourself. The most lavish 200-foot yacht with the best helicopter and all the parties you could ever want, with all the champagne flowing and all the dancers that you want. And then you will monetize it. Because you've spent £300 curating this perfect fantasy world. You can sell it, part of it, admittance to other people who don't have £300. I don't have £300, but I have £2.50, so I'll spend £2.50 to get onto your fantasy world, and you'll spend to get onto mine. I'll invest £300 to create a fantasy world, £10,000, £1 million to create a fantasy world, and I'll make money by charging you to come into my fantasy world. And every fantasy that you could possibly want to create, it's there at the tip of your fingers. Tell me, with no restrictions, what will people do with this fantasy world? Tell me, if the Prophet said in his hadith that the tawasil al-atbaq, the satellite dishes, are going to separate families, what do you think living in a virtual reality world for hours at a time is going to do to families, to husbands and wives? What do you think is going to happen? Tell me, will a young boy who has the access of the entirety of his fantasy at his fingers for 10 pence, will he ever want to come out of that fantasy world and go into the real world? And once he comes out of this fantasy world and goes into the real world, doctor, will he be depressed or not depressed? Be honest. Will he go into some sort of downfall because he can't live every moment in his fantasy? Understand, brothers and sisters, where are we going with these things? And if you and I don't put in the mechanisms at home early on, to help our own children and communities, then we will be destroyed like everybody else will be destroyed with this wave of what's coming. What are the things that we can do? Establish rules for the whole family to follow. It cannot be that mum and dad follow one set of rules, kids follow a set of different rules. Establish rules for the whole family. Number one. Number two, explain the reasons for these rules to the children so they understand it themselves, they buy into these rules. Show interest in what your children are observing and digesting online so that you can keep an eye on it and you are going in the same direction. Introduce frequent screen breaks. Only allow these things in communal areas so that it's not being hidden from you, so that your children don't learn how to create deception in themselves. Have apps to be able to limit what can be seen and know exactly what they are playing on their phones and all other devices. if you can, try to implement these rules and think about what we have said. There is no point in creating a community dedicated to God and then allowing the enemy to come in and take over their minds, their bodies, their emotions. On the night of Ashura, the entirety of the family and companions are sitting in the tents. Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayh is explaining what is going to happen tomorrow, reaffirming everyone who is on the list of the shuhada that are going to echo and reverberate throughout the entirety of history. Al-Abbas, you are on this list tomorrow. Akbar, you are on this list tomorrow. An eager young man, Qasim ibn al-Hasan, cries out, "Oh uncle, am I on that list tomorrow? Is my name to be amongst those names of the shuhada that are going to be celebrated throughout the entirety of the universe? How do you see death, O Qasim?" He responds with those famous words, "Death to me is sweeter than honey." If Qasim ibn al-Hasan had been raised like everybody else, how would a youth have been so willing to embrace the swords of Yazid? It could only have been from digesting, from consuming from his father Imam al-Hasan, from his uncle Imam al-Hussein, from his auntie Zainab and Kulthum, that he was able to respond with such a line. We are told by our dhakirin that on that fateful day of the 10th of Muharram, all of the menfolk were leaving one by one and not returning. Qasim ibn al-Hasan was begging his mother Farwa to be able to let him go. She would come constantly to Imam al-Hussein, "Please, let Qasim go to the battlefield. He is asking, he will not stop asking." Each time Imam al-Hussein as an uncle would look and say, "How can I let my nephew go?" Eventually he is told that Imam al-Hasan has written something for him in this moment. Qasim gifts it to Imam al-Hussein. He opens it up. It is said to be a letter in which Imam al-Hasan says, "Oh my dear brother, I cannot be there on that fateful day to be able to defend you, to represent you. Please allow my Qasim in my stead. Allow my son to go and defend you. This will be my honor for me to be able to see this." We are told that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam takes this letter and kisses it, places it to his face, places it to his chest, smells it, for it is the fragrance of Imam al-Hasan to it. And all he can do with tears streaming down his eyes is bend down and sit with Qasim and say, "Your permission has been granted." The narration says that Imam al-Hasan, his turban and his sword was given to Qasim. Qasim himself is wrapped in the turban of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. He is still such a young boy, a young man, that when he enters the battlefield, his sword is dragging along the ground. This is how short this young child is. This is how heavy this sword is. Can you imagine this young lion, this young warrior facing off against 30,000 unsheathed swords baying for his blood? Can you imagine
Standing by the tents is Abbas. Can you imagine standing by the tents as Imam al-Hussein, watching this young son of theirs, this young nephew of theirs, so proudly reminiscing about what Imam al-Hassan was like on the battlefield. He introduces himself, Ana Qasim ibn al-Hassan, Sibtun Nabi. I am Qasim ibn al-Hassan. They actually were astounded. Is Imam al-Hassan himself on the battlefield? The narration says that he sends many of the enemies towards the pitfalls of fire of Jahannam, but eventually they begin to surround him. They begin to strike Qasim. One of them strikes him. He falls towards the ground. Qasim calls out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah, adrikni, come to my aid. The narration says that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam comes rushing out to the aid of Qasim, but in that moment he strikes the man who struck Qasim down. But when the man was struck down, he wanted the followers of Yazid to come and help him. The narration says that all of the horses began to ride towards him to be able to help him, but as they were riding, who was laying on the ground? It was Qasim ibn al-Hassan. All the enemies trampled over the body of Qasim ibn al-Hassan whilst he was still alive. The narration says that when the dust settled, Imam al-Hussein saw the legs of Qasim kicking in pain, that this was the last moments of Qasim's life, that his body had been broken to pieces, that he had been trampled upon by these horses' hooves. What can Imam al-Hussein do? He falls towards the broken body of his nephew Qasim. He calls out, Qasim, it breaks the heart of your uncle that you called him, but that your uncle could not come to your aid in this moment. All that he can do is pick up Qasim's broken body into his arms and take him back towards the tents. The narration says that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam placed Qasim into the same tent that he placed Ali al-Akbar. Akbar had already been killed. The narration says that he sits between these two broken bodies. He places one hand on the body of his son Akbar. He places another hand on the chest of his broken body, or the broken body of his nephew Qasim. He looks towards the sky. He says, Oh Allah, bear witness that they have taken my sons from me today. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Hussein, Ya 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 Hussein. काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब। रास्ता मुश्किल है तो क्या, रास्ता मुश्किल है तो क्या, नाद अली दोहरा ज़ैनब। काफिला आया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब। मेरी दुआ है साथ तेरे, गम ना कर जो हाथ बंधे, साथ मेरा था करबल तक, जाना है अब शाम तुझे। एक वजीफा हो तेरा, एक वजीफा हो तेरा, ना नाद अली दोहरा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, लेके अलम तू गाजी का, आज से खुद गाजी बन जा, तू भी अली की बेटी है, सदमों से घबराना क्या, रुक न सके पैगाम मेरा, रुक न सके पैगाम मेरा, नाद अली दोहरा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, आंसू पोंछ ले दामन से, आज गुजर जा मक़तल से, मेरी बहन है तू ज़ैनब, सब्र की मंजिल तय कर ले, लाख मुखालिफ हो ये हवा, लाख मुखालिफ हो ये हवा, नाद अली दोहरा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, रास्ता मुश्किल है तो क्या, रास्ता मुश्किल है तो क्या, नाद अली दोहरा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, काफिला एक मैं लाया था, काफिला एक ले जा ज़ैनब, या हुसैन
अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला, अकबर अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला, अकबर अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला, अकबर अकबर मेरा सहरे, अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला, अकबर अकबर मेरा सहरे, लाश अकबर पेशा जब पहुँचे, दिल को हाथों से थाम कर बोले, तेरी फुरकत ने अली अकबर आग दिल में मेरे लगा दी है, तेरी माँ को बताऊँ मैं कैसे, तेरा लाशा उठाऊँ मैं कैसे, अकबर मेरा से, अकबर मेरा शहर, तू है कड़ियल जवान है बेटा, बाप तेरा ज़ईफ है कितना, नूर आँखों का हो गया रुखसत, मुझको आता नहीं नजर खैमा, लेके खैमों में जाऊँ मैं कैसे, लेके खैमों में जाऊँ मैं कैसे, तेरा लाशा उठाऊँ मैं कैसे, अकबर मेरा सहरे, अकबर मेरा सहर, जिसने 18 साल पाला था, कैसे देखेगी वो तेरा लाशा, तेरी शादी का था जिसे अरमा, कैसे झेलेगी वो तेरा सदमा, तेरी माँ को बताऊँ मैं कैसे, तेरी माँ को मैं कैसे, तेरा लाशा उठाऊँ मैं कैसे, अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला, अकबर मेरा मेरा से ऐसी गुर्बत में मुँह नहीं मोड़ो, मैं हूँ तन्हा मुझे न यूं छोड़ो। क्या गुजरती है बाप के दिल पर, गमज़दा दिल को यूं नहीं तोड़ो। अपनी गुर्बत बताऊं मैं कैसे, अपनी गुर्बत बताऊं तेरा लाशा उठाऊं मैं कैसे। अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला अकबर, अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला अकबर, अकबर मेरा सहरे वाला अकबर। या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन।
Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. Allahu akbar, Allahu akbar. Allahu akbar, Allahu akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.